Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living, a podcast to bring the ancient wisdom of yoga to inform your everyday living on and off the mat. Hi, I am your host, Monica Phillips. So often we sabotage ourselves because of the chatter in our heads. This podcast will take you through the 8 limbs of yoga with leading yoga instructors and introduce you to executives who have brought yoga into their lives so they can thrive. Please listen, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Welcome to Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living. I'm so excited to have you here for an episode on asana. I think everyone thinks of when they think of yoga, and we're going to break that down a little bit. To help all of you is the amazing Camille Moses-Allen. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You led this incredible Backbend Workshop for us in the Yoga Works teacher training, and it was just so awesome to have you with us. A little bit about you. Since 2006, Camille has been one of Baltimore's top yoga teachers. She's a senior Yoga Works teacher and teacher trainer, which is how I got the privilege to know her and experience her yoga. She's an eternal student of yoga. You've taken 5 teacher trainings at the 200 and 300 hour level yourself. She's certified Yoga Works teacher, Om yoga teacher, and restorative, becoming quickly my ultimate favorite kind of yoga. So we'll talk about that. Camille has taught thousands of students in Maryland and is really energetic and has this really great energetic approach to the Vinyasa side of yoga and a deep connection to the anatomical focus as well. You have so many incredible accolades, and it's all in the links below. Check out her website, the incredible pictures, the classes. You'll tell us exactly where to find you. Tell us about you first. How do you teach yoga and how did you come to yoga?
I guess the kind of tight version of that is I used to dance growing up with my twin sister, and my mom actually, her master's and bachelor's are in dance history, even though she's a librarian. So we used to dance growing up, and that's in addition to also playing sports and playing music and being into plays and all of those activities. I also really liked gymnastics, but my mom didn't really love that I liked that. It's very physical, and there's a lot of injuries that can sometimes happen. And truthfully, I think in hindsight, it probably saved my body a little bit, but I liked flexibility aspects. So fast forward, after I went to college, my mom and I would take class together actually, and the classes, some of the ones that we went to together were, one was led by one of her former dance friends. So there was this kind of physical movement connection. There was interesting music playing, but we were moving and breathing. And there kind of is a dancey element to some of the transitions of the poses. And then the other class we would take was actually led by my high school biology teacher's daughter. It felt familiar. There was some sort of connection there. But I would go to these classes with my mom, and I really liked it. And I was also very flexible and young when that was happening. And I basically kept with it and never really looked back. My practice has changed, which I know we'll talk about, but got into it that way. And I was working at T. Rowe Price at the time in corporate America, but I was 24 and I found out about a place that had a yoga teacher training, and I ended up taking their training. And I guess something like 6 months after that was over, I decided to teach full time and basically never looked back. That's a short version. Lots happened in between that.
You talked about the dance part of yoga, and in teacher training, part of what I do is observe classes. It's kind of cool on Zoom. You can have all the pictures, all the little squares. And when people say circle their arms from warrior 2 back to downward facing dog, there's just this beautiful, elegant that goes on. And you can watch the coordination. And, maybe some people aren't quite in sync, but overall this flow, and then you'll see some will follow. I do love that part of yoga, our graceful moments, and then there are intense moments as well.
It's interesting you bring that up because I think a lot of people think that that's missing, that it's online, but I don't think so. I can remember what that looked like to me as a teacher, being in the corner of the room or being in the front of the room and seeing that. And I think that's still there. That tone is set by you, the teacher and a student who's willing to show up into this kind of, well, it's not unfamiliar now, but what was unfamiliar territory a year ago.
Let's talk about that, the role of the student in showing up, because certainly when I observe, I can feel the breath in the room. it also means it's not just the teacher, it's the student showing up on the mat and being willing to let go of what they think they're supposed to be
Yeah.
and actually showing up into this asana practice.
There are two sides of that because I do think there are some people who really still crave this ideal scenario, which is without your partner, without your kids, without your pet crawling on you, without I'm doing yoga on a carpeted floor, without all that stuff. To me, that's not really what it's about. Even though, yeah, we are also moving our bodies and we're sweating and we're trying to figure out something that might be physically challenging. But I also think the online has presented an opportunity for people who weren't able to go to class before for whatever reason because of the time, day, or the parking, they were at work or whatever. That's brought me at least a whole other host of students, including people across the country that I would have never met before. Still feeling happy touching into that, I think, is just as important part of the practice as everything else.
I've been a single mom since my son was 2 years old. So online yoga has always been part of my practice. And early it was Yoga Glow, and now Yoga Works has all of the classes. It's great for me. I actually really love there are students who have their kids literally crawling on their
Yeah.
backs. The dogs all come out, the cats, my cats. I don't know what it is. I pull my yoga mat out and they're like, what are we doing
Yeah.
today? Let's play.
The relationship piece. For you, that's your relationship in your mind to those external things. Can you still practice yoga while that's happening? And the answer is yes, but does that take discipline and practice and concentration? Yes. But I also think it provides this other relationship between me as a teacher that's seeing a window into what your real life actually is, not just this 90-minute or 60-minute square of, oh, I see you, and all of that. I think it's about including all of those things. Makes it more interesting.
Let's talk about what is asana, because asana is the third limb of Patanjali's eightfold path to yoga. And in the Yoga Sutras, it really means just to create a comfortable seat, ultimately in preparation for meditation. And so it's become so much more than that, especially with the hot yoga and the 2, 3 level yoga flow sequences. This is maybe not at all about creating a comfortable seat. And there's something so important about it. So tell us what that is.
I have a lot of thoughts about that, but as someone who's taught all those things, the comfortable seat can also mean how can I find I study a lot with the teacher Cindy Lee, and she would say, how can I find strength, stability, and clarity throughout this thing that's not necessarily strong. We first start practicing, we're figuring out how do my hands go on the mat? How do my feet go? I'm practicing on carpet. So every day, am I going to have my balance or maybe not? And that comfortable seat, I think, is just another piece of imagery, I guess, if you will, of how am I going to be stable and steady in my mind when my body is not, which is just another analogy for how life goes. It's not this, we've all felt that in the last year plus some. It's not this straight linear line or path, but we get familiar with that, how we are, how our habits are when we're back there on our yoga mat trying to figure out a tricky pose. So I think there's that piece, but the asana is a physical practice where, yeah, you are sweating, you are stretching and building strength, stability in your body in different ways. And that could be to just be able to bend down with more ease, or maybe it's to find a handstand. I think being curious about all those things over and over is just part of that. I guess my other thought is that a lot of people do yoga, and I feel like a lot more people have it available to them now that it's online. I know in my classes, I see a lot of older people. And so for me, because I care about them being well and healthy and having an experience, I also want them to be safe. So I do think, yes, anatomy and knowing the inner workings of the pose and how that shows up in different people of different ages and abilities, I think is super important. So I do think learning some kinesthetic information about the body is another part of the asana, the physical practice of yoga. For now, at least, I think that's a big part.
I love what you said about creating stability amidst all of the chaos. It's an incredible gift to be able to do that. And it does take practice. So you led a backbend workshop for us for the teacher training. Someone isn't an experienced practitioner going to look out and say, like, why do we do all these fancy poses? What's the point of putting our foot behind our head? Or why do we do Ardha Chandrasana Chapasana or all of the really fancy, intense balancing poses, Ekapada Kundinyasana too? There are so many really cool poses that look incredible. Tell us about the benefits of back bends and then some of the other poses. Why do we do all of these complex postures?
Again, lots of thoughts about all of that. So hopefully I can remember each part of the question. Backbending in general to me is countering what we're doing right now, which is sitting in a chair. Everyone's been at home more than before, and even counters standing, running, biking, hiking, opening up the front of your body, whether you feel like you're stretching or not, but it's creating space in places that tend to go forward over time and shorten because of lifestyle, habit, gravity, age, injury. Places like our hip flexors are getting shortened and tightened right now just from sitting in a chair. So back bending physically is creating space and stretching that. In addition to, yeah, stretching, bending, moving your spine, which we don't always do in other activity aside from yoga, where we're doing things like twisting and going into spinal extension and flexion. And I think it's also important. What I like about it is learning how to do it properly and safely in a way that's going to make your back feel good. Doesn't mean that might not feel hard, but a way that can make it feel like there's more space, that you are successful, if you will, in the more challenging pose. To answer your question about like why we do some of these harder ones, I guess I have a couple answers about that. One is that I think it's so fun. If it's not fun, let's find the class that you do think is fun, that is making you feel invigorated or relaxed, or insert any other adjective there. I kind of like to look at the bigger picture of that sequence. That was a workshop for the advanced 300-hour yoga works teacher training. So even though every student in the training might not be advanced or even be an advanced teacher that's going to teach all of those poses, it's still for you as a practitioner to figure out, maybe I can reach back and catch my foot today. I think a lot of those poses are gradually building up to something that's more challenging, that's maybe a riskier pose, maybe you're not going to do today, but that you're learning the different parts and pieces of said bigger pose. You may never do handstand, but what does it feel like to feel weight in your hands, to straighten your arms, to spread your fingers apart? What does it feel like to lift one leg in the air, be really straight? Those are, to me at least, the other components that go into why we're doing balancing on one leg and then lifting the other one up, and then you're looking over there. And that's all on top of the other piece, finding stability to be able to see, I'm trying this and it doesn't matter if I'm really wiggly, because can I keep going from a place of confidence and enjoyment, even if it's a little bit messy around the edges.
As you know, Tiffany Russo is my mentor teacher, and I love her. Like you, I started in gymnastics as a young kid. Back walkovers, yeah. 4 years ago, I was doing them all.
Yeah.
And I was doing all of the sweaty, hot, challenging flow classes, and I love it. And sometimes I still love it. And I love Tiffany's class. And I love restorative yoga. I watch this arc, and I think some of it is this power of letting go of being attached to needing to do all the fancy poses and embracing the relaxing. And I also know back bends open up the chest. They counter these poses, especially on our phones. Everything is forward and in. So opening, and with twists, it really helps in the digestive system. And then with locust pose, lying on your tummy helps to put weight on different organs, create circulation in the body in different ways.
I would say the other thing I think of is, I mean, I can't wait for this to happen, but I just thought about in the winter time. Well, and you're in California, so maybe it's not as cold as it is on the East Coast, but we're like this a lot, where we're holding on for warmth. And then I go to Lewis, Delaware every year on the Eastern Shore. I've gone there my entire life, and I can still feel the feeling of right before you get into the ocean and it's 90 degrees outside in August and the sun is shining right on you. And there's a different way that we carry ourselves when we're feeling warm, when we're feeling energized, front body opened, upright position, that is different than what we're doing, in other months of the year. And I think this is important to have this slower or more still inward piece. We have to have both of those.
I also think of Ayurveda, how we have these different seasons, different needs for
Right.
different foods, warming or cooling.
I used to teach hot yoga too. And for me, it got to be too much after a certain point because I was teaching it and doing it all the time. And we still need that other piece that's slower, cooler, to stoke that other fire, if you will. That we're not just getting really hot and crispy around the edges, but we're also having this more down regulating piece that's giving us rest and rejuvenation so that we can do both.
Talk to us about the different kinds of asana you teach, the difference between Vinyasa Flow and restorative.
On the yoga work schedule, I teach 2 yoga works level 2 classes and 2 level 2, 3 classes. And those are rooted in Vinyasa Flow, which a lot of times people think Vinyasa means linking breath with movement or chaturanga, up dog, down dog. But it really means to place in a special way. That can be anything, and being conscious and aware of how I do that. So I would say that in my yoga works classes, just for people who aren't familiar with what the yoga works method is, it is to me rooted in a place of alignment and anatomy so that you can keep your body safe. And I think that that word you is individual. So we use a lot of props and make it more accessible for each student. And that's based on ranges of ability, short arms, long arms, tall, taking care of injuries. Those classes build to I don't even want to just say peak pose because I don't think it's just around that. I think it's a peak section of poses that tend to be more challenging. And so that you're warmed up, that your body is familiar and prepared with the actions and positions that you're going to make in this harder section. And I would say it's a mix of stability and strength. And I wouldn't say you're moving fast, but in my classes, we're not holding all the poses forever, except for maybe some core strengthening ones. And then you have time to work on these more challenging poses. The other pieces that I teach with my mentor group in the 300-hour, some restorative poses along with pranayama and meditation. And I do teach pranayama in my classes as well. And restorative yoga, if you don't know what that is or still getting your feet wet with that, I think now is like a perfect time for everyone to be getting more familiar with restorative yoga because you're at home and have many household props available to you. True restorative yoga is when you're being supported or held up by the props so that you're actually not feeling like your body is opening, 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 or stretching, stretching, stretching. And it is a more down regulated but slower practice where you're most of the time closer to the ground. You're holding it for a few minutes to really get the benefits of, well, I could be opening my chest, but I'm supported by pillows or a bolster. Maybe I have an eye pillow over my eyes. I do think it's really good before bed to do some of these, even like 1 or 2 in the middle of the day before you go back to work from your lunch break is giving you some time to decompress and rest, which we don't. That's another hard part of life during the pandemic. People aren't used to having a rest. We're not used to being still. So in restorative yoga, you are being still. That doesn't mean your mind is still. That's equally as challenging to work with, and just recognizing this feels hard and there's nothing to necessarily do about that, but still tapping into that.
I've read and confirmed with so many people that their days are getting expanded by 2.5 hours.
We're working more even though we're working at home. Yeah.
Even I was on a call at 7 a.m. this morning that I normally wouldn't have done if I had to commute anywhere. It wouldn't have
Right.
been possible. I have done it in the past, but it wouldn't have been a regular thing. I just say yes to more things. So there is more of an ease and flow. I appreciate it. Been running my business at home for 7 years. So it's not
Right.
new to me. And because we're not going out and seeing people in person, there's more need for that. And we get exhausted being online. And just talking about restorative makes me feel all warm and cozy. I love
Yeah.
restorative yoga. It is so important.
I feel like you're going to ask me about this, but I think it's important to have different pieces of this yoga pie because I don't think yoga is just about doing the sweaty hard stuff. I think you should do sweaty hard things and get your heart rate going, but I also think what other parts of yoga can we include? Restorative or breath work and meditation, and then also having a life and hobby outside of all of this, going hiking or maybe taking up knitting, reading, whatever it is, so that we can still be supple, and able to kind of go with things as they go, holding on too tightly to the one thing that makes us feel a certain way all the time.
I think you've been talking to Jean Heilman. She talks about the blueberry pie.
I love
you know, Vinyasa Flow, if you push your body all the time, you're not going to get the value that you need from it.
my third 300-hour teacher training. I'm taking it for the second time with Cindy Lee. And I would say if anything is really turning the wheels of my mind the most, it's the one, restorative yoga piece, but two, it's the meditation and the philosophy, which is, and she's Buddhist, and I've been studying that for close to 10 years now. And it's all about how our mind reacts. And we can't have time to stop and pause and respond if we don't make a space for that or create the, as she would say, like the causes and conditions for that, which are meditation. It is restorative when we have to sit and kind of deal with ourselves.
I love that you said that vinyasa is to do things in a certain way, step by step. And the example I use that I got from my 200 hour with Minx and Atsugu, if you put your shoes on and then your socks, it's a very different result than probably what most of us intend. I think there's also thinking about that and expanding it out to all of the different asana practices. There's also an order, like restorative before bed. Probably wouldn't want to do a level 2, 3 vinyasa flow class and then go to sleep. But thinking about the time of day and then what
Yeah.
serves your body.
The pieces of the said blueberry pie people have to kind of figure out when they're new. Because when I've been in teacher training and we learned the restorative part, it was really hard for me to wake up, feel like I was alert and keep going throughout the day. But a big part of what I realized about that was because I was always operating way up high versus down low. So figuring out, okay, what are the benefits of this upbeat, energizing thing versus the slower, more calming and cooling thing, and where do those fit best for me? Because I think some of those results, if you will, are different for everyone. But I think there's a lot of benefit to doing restorative yoga for bed and one or two things in the middle of the day, right after you're having a lunch break or taking like a later break after lunch to down regulate from the workday stress.
I've become a huge fan of yoga nidra, and it's incredibly calming. I even love it in the early afternoon.
Yeah. I still think about this class I used to teach at a gym on the lunch break. There were a ton of people that would come, and it was this Vinyasa Flow. And I would always think, this is just making them ramp up higher to go back to work. But really, we should be bringing that down. Being able to add that in, I think, is a good blend. And just like seeing what happens afterwards.
How do we create steadiness in the mind through an asana practice?
That is a great question. I think there's a lot of things that people can do. It happens on an individual basis. But for me, finding a teacher that I really loved and wanted to have what they were having and following them around and then listening to those teachings or referring to those teachings is really what helped me in the asana practice, but also remembering that you can always start over and having that. A lot of people use this phrase, having a beginner's mind. I even heard someone saying that about, I think they were talking about Tom Brady after all this time. I've never been a huge fan of him, but I think that it is incredible. Keep doing what you've been doing over and over again from a place of clarity amongst all kinds of life changes. It has to come from that. It has to come from stepping into this again and again and again and seeing it with fresh eyes so that you're still interested in what you're doing.
I'm not a huge football fan, though. I always cheer for the 49ers. They will always be my team since my childhood Joe Montana days. But I appreciate watching how they play. And I appreciated it more this year, maybe because I am in the middle of yoga teacher training and hearing how the Buccaneers did it, how they threw away everything they knew and started over.
Again, I'm not the biggest Tom Brady fan, but I did see something about him on, I think it was on CBS Sunday Morning, but they talked about that, about his training, that he's never looking down, even though there are people coming at him from the sides. He's looking at where he's going. And I think to me, that's about being awake and alert and aware. And that's from like that is from years of practice. So the meditation that I practice, which is a Tibetan Buddhist style of meditation, your eyes are open. That's not to have something distract you purposefully, but it's to actually include what's happening in your surroundings so that you have close attention to what you're looking at, whether it's the floor or the wall, but you have an expanded awareness. And if that's not what Tom Brady is doing when he's doing his job, I'm not sure what is. And again, that doesn't happen right away, that you're never distracted, that he's never knocked down or sacked or whatever. But maybe after practicing, there is a little bit more strength there. Oh, he's not looking over there, or I'm not looking down. There's a noise outside and I don't have to look. But that's just from doing the actual practice and seeing what happens without having it be task or goal oriented.
I love that on so many levels. And I think too, for everyday living, because that's what this podcast is about, this yoga, the sense that we're not on a linear path, right? It's
Mhm.
not like, oh, we just keep going up. If we go up and then we come back down and then we need something different and we sit there for a while and then we try something new, maybe we go back before going forward again. And so we're gaining this knowledge, we're gaining all this wisdom, and then we're figuring out what else do we need? What will serve us today? Maybe it's not what served us yesterday, right?
Right.
Maybe it's not what's going to serve us tomorrow, but what will serve us today? And like Tiffany Russo always says, meeting your body where you are right now.
Which is different than where you were yesterday.
You talked about meditation because asana is the third of eight limbs, ultimately allowing us to connect to our breath, allowing us to connect to our wisdom, kind of taking away the layers to go deeper in the koshas and connect to samadhi. Tell me what that's like for you and how for people listening, how they can be more mindful of this process of breath and mindfulness in a fast yoga class.
I think it comes down to what I was just saying about how you can always start over, which means paying attention to each time you're going into, I don't know, chaturanga dandasana or each downward facing dog, that you're seeing that with fresh eyes. When you realize that you're getting really cozy and comfy, that we can pause and take a breath, that it's new again. Remembering, consciously remembering to breathe, even if a teacher isn't saying anything about that, is for the practitioner. Oh, I'm here. This is what I'm doing. It's another opportunity to come back and start again. I always think about, I watched Lost, the series. Once it was over, I binge watched all of it so that I wasn't hanging on for however long it was in between the seasons and stuff online. But I remember one episode, this is in the beginning, and Evangeline Lilly was really freaked out, I guess, about the smoke monster or something like that. And she's inside of this a hollowed out tree or something. And Jack is, okay, you're going to count to five. And I just remember, I think about that sometimes because she was really freaked out. They don't know what's going on. They're in the middle of the, well, Hawaii, I guess, but jungle, mountainous area. She has to consciously stop and count to five and take a couple breaths, take a deep breath, and then moving ahead. I think one, remembering to breathe, treating each breath as a new opportunity to start over, and remembering that this is not linear or task oriented or goal oriented, but the breath is the one thing that's happening right now in each moment. So being able to enjoy and tap into each moment by paying attention to that, the one thing that's happening in each moment.
Read this. I really like it. So I'll read it here. In asana, not only do we feel more flexible physically, but the flexibility expresses itself through an increased ability to be flexible when challenging circumstances arise in our daily lives. As a coach, I ask my clients to notice where they feel certain emotions. And I also ask them to focus on their bodies in order to move away from the chatter in their minds. And this is ultimately what it is about to me. I've experienced yoga where I'm not sure I can do something or where I feel like I'm being pushed a little, it's a little uncomfortable. And then all of a sudden it's not. And it's something really powerful to notice that flexibility comes not from the body, but from the mind. I think in business and in life, we tell ourselves we can't do something. And ultimately, when we can do it, it's because we change our mindset. How have you noticed this in
I
yoga?
mean, we change our mind about things all the
All the
time.
time.
Like, whether it's this to eat, or I don't want this to eat, or I'm not going to wear this sweater, or whatever. But I also think having a teacher is important, is where some of that comes from. Having a teacher that sets you up for success to maybe try this hard pose. And I mean that in a way that's really about the teaching to the student, not for me as the teacher being up there on the teacher pedestal, but really looking at the students and seeing, okay, how can I help them? How can I be more helpful? And that also means creating a space that this might not happen and that's not a big deal. And being able to support that without necessarily saying anything. And for me, that's just not taking it all that seriously. Physical part is not that serious. I really believe in smart teaching. I don't like to use the words cues very often, or even instruction, because it's a teaching. I think that's coming from a teacher, not just the person who's got it memorized, because really you have to support each individual person that's complex. So I like to think about that a lot, but also remembering that there's a bigger picture and that the pose is fleeting. But that's really, I think, part of the teaching of this is going to end. And then how can I keep going in a way that's no big deal, but also not forgetting about that? And maybe that means you take something away from that, but you're also not still worrying about that 5 hours later after it's over.
I'm so glad you said that. We make mistakes and then we move on, right? And if we harbor those mistakes, then we're taking it into the next experience instead of letting it go.
We all do that. We know what we want, we cling to that. We know what we don't want, we avoid that. Or the third one, I think, is the ignorance one, where we just don't really know. And then we're kind of attached to one of those. And that changes how we show up.
Right. And difficulty in life comes from when we have expectations that don't match our current existence. This is not good. This is not good. Instead of what can I do to change what's happening here? I asked you to come and talk about asana because in the Backbend workshop, there was so much play in how you taught and safety, this space where we're doing backbends. It's really big pose and can be so many different things. So creating safety and having all the different variations and allowing play, I think is so important. You ask a kid, what's their favorite topic? You know what they talk about every single day, at least for the kids I know. There are probably some exceptions, but 90% of the time I would say it's recess. They're talking about playing with kids. They're talking about interacting with kids. They're talking about connecting. Do we forget to do that somewhere along the way?
Yeah, because I think there can also be this, I'm talking about on your mat. There's a hardening that happens when we're just concentrating, but really that means you're forgetting about what else is happening. The world's still turning. And we do that in life. I think it's the same thing. And then ultimately we cause our own, you can use the word stress or suffering or strain because we're just focused on that one other thing that's not necessarily happening. So we're either living in the future or hanging out in the past and avoiding what's happening right here. I have a very upbeat personality, I'd say most of the time, because I do think there's a ton to be serious. I think the reason that I can teach in that way is only because I've done it a lot, which means a lot of practice and studying, not just, oh, I did one training and we called it a day. No, I've been teaching really up until a few years ago, every day of the week for years. And I've been teaching yoga for 14 years. So I think for those newer teachers out there, I think that's part of it. You have to study and practice. And when it gets boring, you study and practice some more. And even when you're excited, you study and practice some more, which is what my teacher, Cindy Lee, would say. And I think, I don't even want to use the word persona, but I feel like my persona is like that because that's just the way that I believe works best for me, that there's a time to be serious, but a time to also be nice to yourself. And we can't really be nice to other people if we're not nice to ourselves.
We have to love ourselves to show up for others.
I have a rare joint disease, so I've had a lot of knee surgery, and it's really scary. Stuff happens, and that can be really scary. In a pandemic, everyone feels scared about something, but also recognizing that that's okay. I still have a lot of things that make me really happy. And I remember, I just told this to my significant other. I remember the last time I had knee surgery, maybe 10 days after we went to Philadelphia and we went to a concert, we saw Snow Patrol. And I had bought those tickets for him as a Christmas gift. So it was the springtime. Also, the day I got my stitches out, I also had an emergency root canal. So a lot was happening. And I was really nervous about going to this concert. We stayed in my favorite hotel. And part of me was consumed by fear that I was already miserable, even though in hindsight, I was like, that was totally fine. But I remember at one point in the concert, I looked over and he looked so happy. The happiest I actually think I've ever seen him. And then I just had this moment of really being there and present. My life is amazing, even though this crazy, weird, bad stuff has happened. We can't see that without recognizing that we had both. You're going to be happy when you're sad. You're going to be sad when you're really happy. And being able to live into that, which is going to happen again and again, but being able to recognize it is the practice.
So important, Camille. I think most people miss out on life because they're not present.
It can be an overwhelming feeling to be, oh no, I have to have knee surgery, or oh no, I have a scary disease, or oh no, this bad thing happened, because that's hard. But I also think that's why there are tools like yoga, like meditation and therapy. All of those things shouldn't be diminished. That's what can make us really live into our life fully and in a vibrant way. I wouldn't say that I'm totally carefree, but I feel like I can feel really happy about everything. And it's also from feeling the bad feelings, but not letting any one of those consume what I'm doing or who I am.
I think about this a lot, this idea of needing the dark in order to know what the light is and being able to experience it. And I think about this in asana when I am struggling with something. I think, oh, remember earlier today I did that pose and it was kind of hard and I just experienced it and I noticed what I could do in that moment.
As a teacher and a yoga teacher trainer, that's part of my job. It is part of my job to get you to push a little bit, get you to work a little bit. But that also means if you had a wrist surgery a year ago, am I going to make you do handstand? No. If you want to work on handstand, let's see what we're working with. I think that's middle piece. People don't realize it's not all or nothing. A lot of times it's something in the middle.
That's the meeting you where you are at that moment piece. It's so
Yeah.
important. The big question, what is your favorite pose? Do you have a favorite pose?
I like the inversions. I like Pinchamayurasana, so forearm balance, and handstand, Adho Mukha Vrikshasana. But I also like backbends. A couple I can't do anymore because I can't bend my right knee as much, but I like all the deep ones. And I guess I like them partly because I could always do it. But the other part is from having a lot of surgery. From now, I teach yoga online at a desk. Also, I'm closer to 40 than to 30. It feels different, but it feels like I'm helping my body when I'm doing those poses, which also includes rolling on the foam roller or draping over blocks, not just going up because we can, but we talked about it in the workshop that I taught, like there was a progression of we're laying on our stomach, even though the one bigger one we're going to do is not on your stomach and we're going to balance on one leg and all of that stuff. That's building up to that. But I think to me, it still feels good. The poses should feel like that. Doesn't mean they're not going to feel hard to get there, but it should feel, I think, invigorating or relaxing or rejuvenating and special to you. And you can only feel that if you slow down for a second.
I love my props, and I'm so glad that you talked about this. I remember the first time I did Urdhva Dhanurasana with a strap, and I was, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And you did it also with the blocks at an angle to the wall. And again, I was, whoa, that was such a different pose for me. I loved it. Tell me about props.
There's kind of a misrepresentation of what props and yoga are. I do think that's changing. My experience previously was in a heated class. You're getting really sweaty. It's harder to use the props. Everyone's sweating all over the props. And now there's been a pandemic. No, you're not going to share props. So there's all of that. And I would always say, get your own props is good. Anyway, you can go to Target or Marshalls or something. But props can really make the pose accessible for you. People also don't realize that there are certain anatomical differences in the bony structure of the body, which could be shorter arms to a really long torso. It could be that. It could be that your wrist doesn't bend that much. It could be that you have bunions. I think things like that can make us, and that's in addition to you had an injury 20 years ago and now you have scar tissue. That's making a difference, like a physical difference that we can't necessarily change. So I think people used to think props are there to be a crutch because you can't do the pose. But really, I think we forget that a lot of the poses were designed for a certain type of practitioner in a different time where we're not sitting at home on the computer where there was no Netflix. We weren't running and biking and all of that stuff. So the props are really making it accessible so that you can find your range of motion, that you can find stability in the pose. I don't think this is something I have to remind newer teachers of all the time. Like the pose can help encourage a certain alignment position, but they don't make it stay there. You still have to do the muscular action in addition to setting it up a certain way. So yeah, I think props can really also take the stress out of a pose for certain people. I teach forearm balance of the roll under your elbow sometimes because if you have a shorter upper arm bone, your head is close to the floor. That wasn't something I learned in my first teacher training 14 and a half years ago. So I think that this whole piece of it has evolved. Learning how to how to use them in a way that's useful, not just to use them, but in a way that's useful and helpful. And I think it's like another thing that keeps the students engaged. Right now, I'm teaching online, and there are plenty of people who have already taken teacher training, but not by me. That was a while ago. When I make them do some of these things with props, she's like, oh, it's such another eye opener. And that's what keeps the student coming back and interested. Oh, we're not just doing the same thing all the time. And ultimately, that makes me happy for her experience. If I think about what it means to be a teacher, that means to be helpful. I think being able to have a lot of tools in the toolbox and be able to get, whether you're just coming to yoga for stretching or not, I don't even think that matters. But having a variety of skills as a teacher, I think is just what's going to support your students and encourage them and keep them coming back after years and years and years.
I was on a call earlier today and we were talking about how it's difficult for some people to say they don't know something. It causes a lot of challenges in communication, especially now we're online, we're on the phone, we don't have that same interpersonal interaction. And it's hard to see, is someone understanding this? And we talked about how to create space and give people permission to say, oh, I don't really know that, or I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for. And ultimately, it's a way to say, okay, we're building a team. It's going to be awesome. I want all of you to succeed. What do we need? We need to have permission to say, I don't know how to do that. Let me figure it out. Let me learn. And I feel like that's a lot of what you're saying with props. It's, hey, my arms aren't longer than I can't reach the floor. I'll pull my hamstring. Let me build some
Yeah.
self-awareness and acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think it's hard for everyone because we want to control what's going on. But at the same time, I remember seeing someone and she was 20, she was in teacher training, and she was so afraid of going upside down. Even though I had set her up perfectly, she was having this very physical response. And I was like, it's totally okay. And we just left it there. And that was over a year ago. So maybe she's gone into handstand since then. But I think that means we all have to be okay with setting the space to be in this place of not knowing, which can only come when you don't do the same thing all the time. I think it's hard for newer teachers to really understand why, what we're looking at in someone, and then also why this would maybe be helpful. The page I take from my book is make everyone do it so then they can figure out maybe this is helpful, maybe I don't know. And that means repeating it that way for years.
I was talking with a friend who said she and a friend were noticing how everyone they know over a certain age who does yoga has a very long frame. Do you find that to be typically true of people
Um,
who do yoga a lot?
I think it lengthens a lot of the muscles. And when I used to lead teacher training in person, I never let anyone sit against the wall. And people would hate that. But you don't get stronger by leaning against it. That's how you get better posture, doing the things that support that. I think in general, people just have more body awareness. They do a lot of yoga. They're just paying attention to that. And also, I try to explain it in the very most basic way is that your internal organs are stacked a certain way. So when you're slumping over, it is harder to breathe. And at base level, when people think about yoga, they think about breathing. Well, when you're sitting up or standing up straight, it's easier to take a deeper breath in and be conscious about your breath.
Awareness is a key word for me and something all of us could practice.
Yeah, and that just comes from doing it, showing up and doing it. And that might mean on your own at home, just unrolling your mat and taking the care of your props, of your body, mindfully doing things.
Is there a right amount of asana practice?
I don't really like to dole out those kinds of things, but I do think if you never do, let's go with handstand. If you never do handstand, you can't expect to do it all of a sudden. There's a time to practice that if that's what you want to work on. But I do think there's too much of a good thing sometimes when you're feeling worn out and broken down and your body needs a rest. But I do think something comes from having a regular practice, but regular might mean 2 times a week. That might mean 3 times a week. I don't think it means necessarily 7 days a week. And I say that so that we don't get too attached to some outcome. I'm saying that differently of exercise in general, because I also think that can mean your breath work or breath attention or breath awareness exercises, or maybe that includes meditation. Maybe that just means a couple restorative poses.
What I hear is we are the sum of our habits. I like this philosophy. And I think that's so true. You can't just show up and do handstand. There are some people who just
Yeah.
can do it, but ultimately we become what we practice.
And I think they only can do it because they've done it for so long. Someone who was a cheerleader forever. When I come into teacher training and I'm like, well, there's a time to push you a little bit and a time to not do that. You got to show up to figure out.
What a pleasure.
Thanks for
so
having me,
much.
Monica.
Thank you for joining me for Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living. Please learn more about our guests in the show notes and check out their awesome yoga classes. Subscribe, like, and share this podcast with a friend. And please send me your feedback. I would love to hear from you. You can learn more at sparkpluglabs.co.